Mr. Apar Gupta is the executive head of the Internet Freedom Foundation, an Indian digital liberties organization that seeks to ensure that technology respects fundamental rights. He has completed his post graduation from the Columbia University School of Law and has been working extensively on public interest issues, which include strategic litigation and organization of campaigns and collectives. In quotes, his work as a lawyer includes key digital rights cases on privacy and censorship and constitutional challenges to Section 66A of the IT Act, the right to privacy, and Aadhaar, representing public interest litigants. He has worked extensively with activists and set up digital campaigns such as those on net neutrality, fight against defamation laws, and safeguard privacy. He has also authored a book on the IT Act 2000. He remains committed to advancing the values of Constitution of India in a digital technology mediated society. Thank you for being here, Mr. Gupta. We are so very happy to have you here with us.
It's my pleasure. And I look forward to this interview, engaging with people who are not Gen Z but are digital natives, given the terminology of the work that I deal with. And secondly, I'd like to emphasize that young organizations which are involved in social work are hugely beneficiaries of both fundamental rights and technology. So I'm just looking forward to this conversation with you.
Thank you so very much. So I'll start the interview with with the first question being extremely general nature and like a little personal as well. What does internet freedom mean to you? Like, what do you mean by it? Internet freedom.
So I'll tell you my own personal journey. I come from a very privileged background in which I had access towards digital technologies, the specific waves of adoption. As a child, one of the first things which your parents give you is either a toy or a educational material. And I often got them through purposes of technology. For instance, I had an Atari controller which had a physical black joystick with a red button to play Pong. And subsequently, I've played all the role-playing games which are there on computers. I've seen broadband access being there, which was earlier through shell accounts, then was through telephone lines, and the modem speeds increase. And today you have this magic which you call Wi-Fi. All of this experiences, Edward Snowden also puts it in his book. And in fact, incidentally, he was born in 1984, the same year I was born in, is essentially all these waves of technology allowed me to develop my personality, come into my own, explore a world in which I knew that there are certain things I liked, certain things I would flourish in, a space of joy, a space of exploration of my personality. And this is what internet freedom means to me as a person. And which is why I think this benefit needs to be there for a lot of others in India who today don't have access to internet. And when they do get access to internet, they should get it in a manner in which their fundamental rights are secured. They're safe and secure within those environments in which they can explore through exercises of free speech and expression. And yet that same point, they don't feel profiled and trapped within the ecology of digital systems, social media platforms, and doom scrolling.
Right. I think that's a very interesting way to put it. And it often comes from our own experiences. So because you mentioned that you have seen technology evolve over the years. So therefore, I don't know if I am that much aware about the time before technology because I sort of like grew up with technology. I was born in 95. So by the time like I reached class 9, class 10, so like laptops and internet, like that time, like Wi-Fi was not still a very big thing, but yeah, like it was coming up. And I still remember we used to have those broadband things to have internet. But I think the quantum of accessibility to internet in the last couple of years has increased uh, quite massively. Like I still remember the time where a 3 MB internet used to be there for an entire month. And now, like if we have on our devices, like it's like 1 GB is there for a day. So I think like the more we are getting exposed to it, the more important it is for us to, you know, like understand what technology is and what technology can do. So I think like the more we are getting exposed to it, the more important it is for us to, you know, like understand what technology is and what technology can do. So I think like the more we are getting exposed to it, the more important it is for us to, you know, like understand what technology is and what technology can do. So I think like the more we are getting exposed to it, the more secure the space as well. Don't you agree with it?
I completely agree. Firstly, what is your anecdotal um, inference about access expanding in the last few years is supported by data which is published every quarter by the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, which notes a substantial increase from 300 million to close to 700 million active internet connections in India. That's a spectacular growth, and it's taken place at a price point which is very competitive, which is allowing more and more people to connect. In fact, governments across political dispensations and across the political spectrum support internet access as a right. However, there are core challenges to it. Firstly, there's still a large number of people who remain unconnected. For instance, our own organization worked on bringing internet access to close to 4 lakh people in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, quite often whom were having very slow speeds of internet and also very high costs of internet. And beyond that, what we need to recognize are large parts of India remain unconnected because the underlying digital infrastructure, the network infrastructure, most people access internet through smartphones, again according to data published by the Department of Telecom and the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. So the cost of the smartphone today is equivalent to an average Indian's 6 months pay, even for the low end smartphones and feature phones. So we need to make accessibility universal. That's the first thing. And the second thing is when that access does come along, it needs to come along in a mode and manner where the internet is secured and cannot be switched off and taken away, or core portions of it, because it's a public space, shouldn't be guarded or walled off to us for access. So our organization also works on reforms on issues such as internet shutdowns, website blocking, and just to ensure that the online environment is safe and secure, because there's so many young Indians or using it to explore their political values. And how do you learn political values except through debate, discussion, even through essentially criticizing others in very, very strong language? I think that is all a part of our journey as individuals in a diverse society such as India in growing up. And I hope really that we can achieve the goal of 100% coverage, and it overcomes the barriers of social inequality. And it's great that the government has also started mapping it on lines of discriminatory access right now, as is present along lines of gender, caste, as well as other socio-economic factors. So not caste and socio-economic, but at least on lines of gender, it started counting that, but we need to universalize it. So that's my primary and first message. And the second is when access comes along, it needs to come along to what, right? Water is great and needs to be given to everyone, but it should be to the fitness of that quality of water, that it needs to be consumable by people who are living in affluent neighborhoods in metropolitan cities, same as those who are living in villages or in other residential spaces which may not be that affluent. So we need to universalize internet access and make sure that its quality also retains that public character.
Right. Um, because you just mentioned the work that your organization is doing. So I just wanted to ask, how has the journey been like so far for you running Internet Freedom Foundation, and what have been the challenges and how have you overcome them so far?
So, Kunal, I was talking to you before in this call, and you were saying how your own non-profit came about. It's always, I would like to disclaim my own contribution here, because I'm only a placeholder for the efforts which are led by a wider team. And that wider team was actually the Save the Internet movement. If you remember, there was a video put out about network neutrality. I was part of that
Yes.
movement. And I was the lawyer alongside with Ramanjeet Singh Cheema and Amba Kak, who designed how should people correspond with the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India to ensure that your internet service provider cannot charge you in a discriminatory manner for the websites that you access. Internet service providers like Airtel and Vodafone at that point in time were arguing that they should be able to go beyond your monthly bills and charge you more if you stream videos from YouTube, for instance, if you do video calls over Zoom. And they were saying that's because that if you use these kind of services, our servers get stressed, and it's more and more beneficial to these large companies rather than to us. So we need to charge our consumers more. But by itself, it would result in shaping of internet behavior, where people would stop using and utilizing certain services, innovation would go down, and by itself, it would become a very restrictive space. Network neutrality is a global principle, and through working with others, which included activists, stand-up comics, technologists who set up the platform, how we could send those petitions to TRAI to save the internet movement was built. There were several people and co-founders who were part of it. And the Internet Freedom Foundation was registered as a body to take that Save the Internet movement forward. Because any movement which arises at a particular point in time where there's high amount of public awareness. And subsequent to that, one always notices that the public awareness which is around that issue shifts to another issue, given that we as a society face so many broad challenges. But the people who are committed and who lead that movement, it becomes incumbent upon them as a responsibility to take forward the trust, the faith, and the support vested in them by the members of the public, which supported them initially in the movement as an organization. So, Internet Freedom Foundation is actually a product and was birthed through the Save the Internet movement. And over the past 3 years, we've grown our mandate beyond network neutrality to core principles of the Indian Constitution. If you look at the preamble, our preamble to the Constitution talks about possibly four primary values, which are liberty, equality, fraternity, and social justice. And technology today ties in with all four of them. So our work has now expanded towards it more tangibly. If you go to our website at internetfreedom.in on free expression, privacy and data protection, innovation, and net neutrality, which remains an issue which we continue working on. We are also getting into new areas such as election interference, artificial intelligence, digital identity, disinformation, facial recognition, because technology is growing and it's impacting all of our fundamental rights. So the Internet Freedom Foundation is today an advocacy oriented organization which does civic literacy on these issues because these issues are new and technical. And secondly, takes all that awareness which is generated towards a responsible engagement with institutional stakeholders. This journey has been beneficial. We changed from a movement to an organization. And today, as an organization in a governance structure, we have the co-founders of the movement being trustees, and we have a staff size and contractors, which number close to 12. We strategically litigate before courts. We reach out and provide support to parliamentarians as well as members of state assemblies. We participate in public consultation processes, and we always make sure our work is transparent, it is accountable, it is in the public domain, and we make active outreach so we can bridge the divide between public policy and the public.
Right. I think that sounds very, very, very interesting and good. And surely the work that has been going on. And I first came to know about, as you mentioned, even about net neutrality through the video. And because it went viral and there were so many conversations, and that time even I wasn't fully aware about what this entire issue is. That it was a very new it was a very new area for me. But slowly and steadily, as I was reading about it, I became more and more aware about it. And as you mentioned, there has been a lot more awareness about these issues as there was like a couple of years back. So I think more and more young people are also getting aware about their digital rights as well. It's not, and as you very rightly mentioned, it's not just our social rights are very much connected to our digital rights as well. So yeah, um, I'll just move to the third question. So, what do you think is the consequence of the current state of laws and policies for the governance of digital space?
So, one basic principle we often come with towards this conversation is technology is marching ahead and laws are catching up to them. But the thing is, sometimes laws by themselves are catching up because we have not created institutions, not for our future, but for the present. What I mean by institutions are regulatory bodies which can look at them adequately. For instance, we in India still don't have a data protection authority, and data we know intersects with each element of our life. So that is a conversation which is ongoing right now in the parliament within a joint parliamentary committee. And once we get that kind of legislation and framework in place, we can hopefully have a data protection authority or a privacy commissioner, which will be an institutional body to prescribe regulations, create incentives, do user literacy across India with millions of Indians who are getting connected every day, and will just ensure good norm keeping. Let's think about it like industrialization, because we think about the internet as a great disruptor of our lives, providing opportunities but also challenging our ways of work, right? And being as a social change which is taking place so dramatically every day in each part of our life, may it be professional, personal, and that's the way to visualize and think about it. These laws need to be centered within our constitutional values. They need to forward a democratic vision in which each individual is the repository of power and has a degree of fundamental rights, and yet at that same point in time, it fits with the larger social vision. So we need to make these laws. We need to reevaluate our laws also. For instance, on free speech and expression, given that there's so many people who have come online and the internet is fundamentally a democratic technology with two-way communication, in which for the first time so many people can broadcast to very large number of Indians with a smartphone. Otherwise, earlier you needed to print pamphlets, for instance, right? And you needed to distribute them, a very high cost in terms of logistics, right? Now just take
Right,
your magazine itself, yeah. You're distributing it digitally. You don't know where it will go. The costs are lower for distribution. You don't need to send it by courier or post. And
right,
here's the thing: when you start becoming speakers on the internet as active citizens who are taking part in this democratic discourse, should some of our speech provisions, which restrict speech and are vague, should they stand? Don't they pose a risk to every ordinary Indian? And is criminality and criminal penalties the right way to only think about it? This is not to say that people should be permitted to abuse, should be able to do 10 to 20,000 things which they do on a daily basis, which may be socially undesirable or may even be illegal, right? Like threats of
right.
violence, especially abuse which is directed towards women and minorities. But at the same point in time, we need a rationalization in our laws on certain very clear offenses where democratic countries across the world have moved past them, such as criminal defamation and sedition. So I would say our laws, firstly, need to be created for better regulation along first principles. It gives a level of predictability to users as well as producers who are Indians. We do both, right? And secondly, the number of criminal penalties and the impacts on free expression need to be also better considered, considering all of us today are speakers and we are broadcasters and we are participants in a larger democratic sphere.
Right. And I think that's a very interesting way to put it because recently um, I was looking at the number of cases of defamation, like criminal defamation that are going up on the internet. And somewhere we need to actually, I understand that there's a definition laid by the law on defamation, but there's a civil case for defamation and there's a criminal case for defamation. And as a lawyer myself, I still am not able to completely comprehend why are we like, why is the same crime being processed on two different grounds, and the most importantly, what is the need for it? Like, and I think that's often, like, as an ordinary citizen, often what I see, like what I can understand and comprehend, is the use of these laws is often to curb the free speech, like, putting the defamation cases, like putting, even often we see, even in civil matters, somebody like a person A will sue the person B for 100 crores on a civil defamation case. Like, it's like, we know
So,
what we are
yeah.
keeping
So
it
as a
low.
practicing
But
lawyer, I've defended several journalists and platforms on this. I was actually the lawyer for Maheshwar Perry, who exposed IIPM, the Indian Institute of Planning and
okay,
Management, which was, yeah. So I did that case, and I took those learnings, and I was also the lawyer for the Foundation for Media Professionals, and we constitutionally challenged Section 499 of the Indian Penal Code, which resulted in a judgment called Subramaniam Swamy versus the Union of India. But let's just take a step back. Okay. On the basis of this experience, I'd like to also tell you the work the Internet Freedom Foundation has done to follow up on it. Firstly, defamation is a injury to somebody's reputation, and injuries to somebody's reputation have been historically viewed in the context of somebody coming from a very high status and position in society, not being people like you and me, being basically knighted lords or ladies of virtue. And essentially what was happening in Victorian England was that there was this entire practice of duels where if anybody's name was besmirched by private letters which became public or rumors which was spread, they could challenge the other person to a duel by pistol or by sword. And thereby, the underlying presumption was that church and God would be overlooking the more virtuous one, and the person who would prevail in that battle, who would not die, okay, would essentially either repair their honor, or the statement that they made, which was alleged by the complainant to be defamatory as a ground of inviting the other to fight on that word, okay, would essentially either be proven true. So it would not be defamation. So it was resulting in a huge loss of life for the landed gentry and the elite in Victorian England, which is why the criminal offense of defamation was made, because it was needed to have uh, a level of a very strong criminal sanction attached to it. Clearly, we are not in medieval England anymore, right? So, what's the
right,
underlying basis of the law lacks justification. However, at the same point in time, you have the civil law of defamation. Criminal leads to punishment, which is imprisonment. Civil leads to monetary fines and injunctions. Injunctions can basically be a very technical form of saying that you won't say that again, you'll publish an apology, you'll issue a retraction. And the monetary fine can be essentially to repair your reputation, but can't be punitive. For instance, you can't essentially ask for 100 crores or 200 crores to repair your reputation, because the other person will just not be able to pay it. You're not creating a deterrent then, you're creating a very, very strong penalty again. And usually people do make mistakes. They shouldn't be essentially declared insolvent for saying something defamatory. There needs to be a proportionality to what they have said in terms of punishment. All these problems, how do we fix them? So we essentially launched a campaign called Speech Bill with the office of Tathagat Sarpati, who was a member of parliament, and he filed a bill called the Protection of Speech and Reputation Bill, because it's also important to understand people's reputations are important. If someone spreads a rumor about you and you are at a very advanced stage in your life and you have done considerable amount of work, it can impact you negatively. However, at that same point in time, there need to be certain principles which need to be codified in law, right? So criminal defamation needs to be repealed, civil defamation needs to be reformed, and the only way it can be done is through an act of parliament. And IFF worked on it. We drafted this bill, it was submitted as a private member's bill, and private members' bills are never passed in parliament. Their expressions,
Never.
quite often, you can just visualize of thought when country is ready for this conversation. But I think more and more people get connected, we are in fact reaching a stage where people will be ready for this conversation. So we believe that content laws fundamentally interact with the internet, with most publications and more people coming online. And due to these reasons, we supported the speech bill effort. And we believe that this private members bill, which has not passed through parliament into law, and will not do so in any time the foreseeable future, because that bill has also lapsed with the new session of parliament. Despite these odds, we hope that it sparks a longer public policy conversation, and we'll keep working on that consistently. So thank you so much, Kunal, for opening up this question around defamation. And I welcome more people to explore the resources we have put around on internetfreedom.in around the speech bill campaign, and also look at the speech bill campaign, which still has a Twitter handle which is curated by a lot of people and demonstrates how defamation is much more characterized by its abuse rather than actual serving the needs of people whose reputations are genuinely injured. So we need this kind of legal reform.
Right. Um, Now, do you think the current developments like the DNA bill or the face recognition, etc., technology are challenging the nature of privacy and data mining in India?
So privacy has been articulated by the Supreme Court in the case Puttaswamy judgment, which
Hmm.
essentially links to all our fundamental rights. And privacy is expressed in philosophical terms of concerning our autonomy, dignity, and liberty. Autonomy basically means that whenever you would like to make a decision, you have a high degree of personal self-control to do it. For instance, the shirt I'm wearing and the color I'm choosing is up to my decision making. I'm not straight jacketed into a uniform by any other authority. And as an adult, I need to be open towards doing it. Similarly, it intersects with other areas of my life, my diet, right? The people that I meet and I broach friendships with, collegiality with. So that level of compulsion in my individual behavior is not to a degree if I'm not doing something illegal, right? Yet at the same point in time, as we live in a society, there is a need for a certain degree of social control. Laws will be passed. For instance, smoking is bad, right? And the government will come out with regulations which will prohibit it. So where do you draw these lines on the basis of the right to privacy becomes in fact much more murky when you think about personal data, which is why we need a personal data protection law which follows these principles which are expounded in the right to privacy judgment. Secondly, the technology advances which are taking place quite often relies on an extraction of personal data, and sometimes have also economic incentives for extraction of personal data, given that personal data is valuable and companies can make money out of it. So sometimes they collect more and more information, more than what is necessary. What is necessary is essentially a purpose to which we consent, which is one of the bedrock principles of a privacy in the data context, that you have to seek a person's consent before taking any kind of personal information from them. Secondly, it needs to be tied to a purpose and objective, and there need to be reasonable safeguards. For this, we need legal regulation. Certain recent deployments, such as facial recognition, on which IFF runs a tracker, are really concerning, because facial recognition is an inaccurate technology, and even if it becomes accurate, it will lead to what we in law call a chilling effect. Suppose you're always under watch in public spaces, and in the public-private boundary, as much as is there, even in public spaces, we may like to engage in certain conduct, for instance, whistle, tap, or just stroll, right? It will be visiting people in very, very tough contexts. For instance, just imagine yourself every time you pass by a police person or a thana, don't you feel yourself straighten up a bit your spine, right?
Mhm.
So that is a chilling effect of almost involuntary physical action. Think about it like that, right? So when you're always under watch, you're essentially under the supervision of a higher authority, and it takes away a person's individuality. Not that we do not trust law enforcement, but we should question it because they have so much power over us, right? And when we're completely under their gaze at all points in time, it will be something which is de de-individualizing the ability of individuals to act. So there's a lot of literature on it. IFF documents the deployment of facial recognition technologies across India on a state-by basis through the project Panoptic. And you can go on panoptic.in and check out more details. We have a very well developed petition which is urging the Prime Minister's office to ban this technology in terms of deployments with police, but not ban it for our own personal use, for instance, of face unlocks, because technology is something we really believe in. We believe in its power, its promise. What we disagree with is when it undermines our fundamental rights, and those deployments are done without a basis in law. And law is necessary because then it limits how much you can do, it defines what can be done, and also provides safeguards. And none of this exists with respect to facial recognition technology. Some other deployments of technology also have been concerning, but by and large, I would like to restate the positive value of technology in our lives and also commend a lot of innovators, technologists, and startups which are especially in India, based out of Bangalore, who are the core supporters of the Internet Freedom Foundation, who actually believe in constitutional rights and are trying to integrate those values within their work. So both through building product as well as through values, I think so we'll be able to overcome these deployments in the future. People call me a hopeless idealist, but I think that's the only way we can survive in today's world. I think also what's the alternative to this is very, very dystopian, in which one lives with cynicism in their own political outlook, which slowly starts creeping into their personal lives. And that is not the way to live, especially in a country like India, which is not only based on individual freedom but community values.
I think that's so very rightly put. And when you were mentioning about the facial recognition being everywhere and like cameras being everywhere, that just like it did for a second remind me of 1984 by George Orwell, and this entire idea that the big brother is watching, the like somebody who's above you, like an authority figure is watching. And I think the manner in which I always look at these things, like technology in itself is never bad, it's the manner or the purpose for which that technology is being used. uh, the face recognition, when we use it on our personal mobile phones, it's a great technology. My hands are busy. I just, like I just do something and like it'll just look at me, like the camera will detect me and it'll automatically turn on. But at the same time, if it's being done for a purpose which is curbing my own individual liberty and freedom, then again, it's the same technology at the end of the day. But the purpose changes the entire dynamic. So I think yes. And the other thing that I really want to comment on, just making a very quick comment about like being and an idealist, hopeful person. I think that is what we need more and more in our society. It's there are there are thousands of reasons for being just cynical about the way society is progressing. But even if you find this one reason to be hopeful, I think that's more than enough. Like that's more than enough to just hang on to it and just keep going, because like if we also give up, then like who's gonna be there? And like somebody needs to stand for these ideas, somebody needs to stand for these ideals, these broader vision about the sort of country that we want to lead and live in. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
Kunal, just on that, I'd like to say that our idealism needs to be chatted also in pragmatism and a much more realistic assessment of our work. And this is what we do at IFF. So we are not looking at immediate outcomes. They're not days when we do not feel a sense of anger, irritation, but our larger outlook and strategy needs to be built of good faith, of looking at what we can do. And optimism provides us that level of motivation to do it. For instance, look at internet shutdowns, which are taking place all over India, and India is possibly the world leader on it. Now, the internet shutdown, which took place in Jammu and Kashmir, was after the repeal of Article 370 and the conversion of that territory into two union territories around, I think so, August 5th. Thereafter, there
Right.
was an internet shutdown lasted more than 500 days. We went to the Supreme Court assisting other bodies for in close to 4 rounds of litigation. But what we gained through that is not only that restoration, but incremental positive change. Because earlier to this litigation, there was no obligation of transparency in which when you shut down the internet, there was no requirement on the government to publish this order, to provide reasons why it was shutting down the internet, and it limited it to a space of time. So I know this is not a victory, but this is an incremental positive movement, and we need to be more patient. And I say this to young people, and let your anger feed that patience. Let your anger and irritation actually turn into a level of determined optimism that yes, we will win, and set up 10 to 20 IFFs. Okay, because this is what India needs right now. We can possibly also, and there is space for advocacy. You can have your advocacy, which is also very radical, which calls out truths and actually challenges unjustified exercises of power which are not within a democratic framework. You can bring your own political ideology, but you need to commit, and you need to be patient, and you need to build constituency, and finally it needs to be done within the constitutional framework. And this is what India needs. I will just like to also say that in IFF, most of my colleagues who are there actually are in their mid to early 20s. And if you look and you like our work, it's because of people who are possibly your age who are actually committing to it. So we are going beyond words into actual action. Look at our Instagram page, look at our Reddit page. All of those outreach mechanisms have been created and developed not only as social media, but actually a civic literacy and constituency building in which conversations happen organically, in which translations are done of our work by volunteers who say that we will actually translate this entire principles of privacy into regional Indian languages, right? And we all have those skills. We have that small amount of time. Let us volunteer more and contribute to the larger whole, right? And that does not mean we shouldn't critique each other, because critique helps us, but be gentle and do it with good faith, because you know the other person also has their own life experience. They're coming from a different place, a different time, a different set of social and personal experiences. So I would just urge for that as we all step into different forms of social work.
Right. And like I'll just talk from my own personal experience on this. I still remember before starting ITISARAS, I used to be extremely frustrated. I was so angry all the time about, how things were happening. Why are we putting these definitions on things like culture? Why is there no structured background to it? And I still remember this conversation I had with a senior of mine who just recommended this one thing to me. And I think that mantra in a manner like changed my entire outlook. And his entire statement was like, Kunal, look, I get it that you're angry, you are frustrated. Just channelize all that anger and frustration to create something productive, not just for yourself, but for the society at large. And I think somewhere at that point, I did not get that thing. But now looking back, I think like I've actually been acting on that mantra all this time. Like whenever I feel angry, whenever I feel frustrated, I just try to channelize that anger into something which is much more larger than me, to create something which is much more substantial and actually be productive on my way. Like, so yeah, I think that is something that I've tried to do with all the work that we have done so far. So I completely agree with you. Like it's important to be idealistic, but it's also important to be a little bit pragmatic in your approach on how you are going to achieve the target that you have aspire to uh, aspire to reach at a particular point. So yeah,
That's
I'll
really
just
that's really beneficial for me to hear, Kunal, also, because it brings one more learning, which I think a lot of people who are young need to have. So I've benefited in my life, just like you, Kunal, from mentors. And mentors don't need to be people who are there all the time, right? Who are guiding you, like your parents are, possibly
Mhm.
elder sibling. They can be people who you can reach out to at certain points in your life when you're essentially presented with a fork on the road, which path to take, left or right. Possibly, if you forgive my reference to one of the cult classics called The Matrix, take the red or the blue
Yeah,
pill, right?
which
Be
yeah,
Morpheus, and we all need to search for the multiple Morpheuses which will be in our lives, because there are people much more experienced than us, and young people have so much learning, so much passion, a new way of looking at things. They often usually recast societies completely. However, at that same point in time, there are certain things and values which still remain. And this is why it's important to learn from history. Your instructors can be derivative. Okay. Your Morpheuses can come through reading, through perception and self-learning. They can also come through people. So please learn about your field. And we do that every day in technology, because technology changes so much and every day. So a good mentor is usually very, very valuable in your journey and professional growth. And it's been very core to our work at IFF. A good mentor can also take the form of following experts on social media and going much more beyond the chatter which sometimes exists just on the surface, and diving a little much more deeply into the subject areas which are resonating very passionately with you.
right. Um, I think I'll ask the next question about the manipulation that is being done to the digital spaces for politicized navigation. How do you think that entire uh, uh, how that entire territory is being chartered right now in India?
So I'll just take this in three parts. The first is a bit philosophical, and that's basically because you talked about 1984 and George Orwell. George Orwell basically says that society will be controlled in his novel by 1984, in which there's an autocratic society. An autocratic society, as per dictionary definition, means that you don't have any personal space and boundaries. It doesn't mean that it's from the left or the right. It just means the state is so powerful, it's always watching you, it's always controlling your behavior, and takes away core parts of your individuality, like books, music, because they give you a sense of thought, of dynamism, that hey, I don't need to walk in a straight line, maybe I can hop, maybe I can spin, right? And that's something which is inconvenient to autocrat, because that is diversity, right? They need to then allow for that space. So for administrators, as any Excel sheet which you may fill, you like very clean variables, right? But imagine those variables are human beings. And that's the larger premise of George Orwell's 1984. On the flip side, there's Aldous Huxley, who says that society will not only be controlled by this kind of society, by this kind of powerful penalty and control and restraint, but can also be controlled by what he calls as soma, drugging people with more and more and more. So imagine there's a stick, but there's also a carrot. And what is soma today but social media? You open social media and it's engineered, it's practically engineered to the point where you spend more and more time there. This ends the philosophical aspect. Okay. And if you want to read more, there's a great contrast to that given by a writer who works on public education. His name is Neil Postman, and he's written a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he basically talks about how cable broadcast news is not news, it's infotainment, and why infotainment is actually devaluing journalism. May resonate with a lot of people. But he says that a lot of
Right.
people are not controlled by censorship as much as they are controlled by media ecology, which feeds them junk rather than nutritious values which they need. And we know we can carry on with a carb heavy diet or a balanced diet. Okay, and we enjoy the carb heavy diet quite often. So this ends the philosophical aspect. Let's come to the practicality. Most social media companies which are built today are built on a fundamental economic premise that they are essentially advertisers which use your personal data to create profiles of you. These profiles have elements of your personal data which demonstrate your personal habits and traits, and you may not even realize the granularity to which this is regularly gathered. They're persistently A/B test you. So essentially, push two messages to you and see how much time you're spending, how much you're engaging with that content. And there is technology to the level where it can be pixel tracked as well. And smartphones may also have sensors in which your intensity of touch can be. So imagine a dating app you're on, even the time spent in flipping, even the battery usage and how you react, all of these device permissions are feeding into specific points of information which are profiling you. So they're not going into who you like and who do you not like. It is telling these people, these social media companies, these technology platforms, why do you like someone? How much do you like someone? And do you even like them or not? And are you lying to yourself because your actual behavior is contrasting with what do you say? So they can infer that all based on the sensors and the data which are incessantly gathering everything through smartwatches, through cell phones, through Alexa devices. And sometimes it doesn't need to be you. It needs to be somebody else who's in your presence. So that's why you sometimes are creeped out when you're having a conversation with a friend. And you say, why is this Instagram ad showing that to me? I did not even add that person. I only met them. Why are they being recommended to me? You feel as if you're being stalked, right? So this
Right.
kind of surveillance apparatus is actually fed by an economic basis in which these ads can be served. And these ads can be served better if you spend more time, if you keep using that. And engineers spend time in extraction and devising this, but also in terms of ensuring that you spend more and more time. So both elements match, your time spent and the data extracted. Now, political parties are a very interesting layer on top of that, and disinformation sits on top of that. And political parties, you may know, just given how they are funded opaquely today by electoral bonds, which are not transparent. You do not know the donor details. Corporate donations are allowed. Political parties also, as per statistics published by the Association for Democratic Reforms, have a very high number of criminal under trials, and there's a larger criminalization which is historic of people who are representative in local assemblies as well as in places of parliament, going even beyond the original prosecution for the illegal dharna to cases of murder, alleged cases of murder, and a very serious criminal offenses. They are using it in a way which quite often is manipulative. It is manipulative to the extent where it is making people believe things which are not there, or increasing polarity in environment in which there's a us versus them divide, in which there's a tribalism which occurs. Hey, I am on the right, they are on the left. They are on the right, I am on the left. And my only job is to bash them. Whereas both don't realize that quite often that the governance processes which are being followed are similar. They're inefficient and they don't serve the needs of people. Quite often more used by political parties which are in power, because historically political parties which are in power can garner much larger resources because they are in power and our institutions are not that strong, right? So let us also recognize that disinformation is a core challenge. Again, the Internet Freedom Foundation, in prior to the 2019 general elections, worked with a range of other established nonprofits, including the Association for Democratic Reforms, Common Cause, and authored a joint letter which was endorsed by two former chief election commissioners, which first proceeded with transparency in the funding of political parties, because those funds would primarily be used towards election campaigns which would be organized digitally and disinformation which would result. registration mandatorily of everyone who's affiliate with that process, and prescription of penalties also, and preventing dark money, which is unaccounted money, from funding that through third party affiliates. What we need are free and fair elections. What we need is accuracy and prevention of any kind of appeals towards communal passions as well as hate speech during the conduct of elections. I believe that the polarity we are seeing on a daily basis on social media is very destructive towards our shared vision of India being a place of diversity where we all disagree but ultimately agree on the end goals, because it's turning people against people, Indians against each other.
Right. Um, I think from all our conversation that we have had so far, let me ask this last question, which is a little twisted. How do you think mass surveillance strategies can be used for the betterment of society and its governance? Number one, is it possible that it can be used? Number two, how?
So I believe mass surveillance strategies by itself at its very root are an expression of desire of social control. And essentially, one needs to always view it from the perspective that is it a trade-off, and that's the framing adopted by people who essentially pose it for the benefit of security. But when you objectively analyze it as per available empirical evidence, it shows that they're costly, they're inefficient, and they don't work on pure metrics. They don't
Okay.
work. Yeah. So the Snowden revelations revealed that billions of dollars were invested, but they weren't able to catch anyone due to those mass surveillance activities, more or less. And objectively, mass surveillance is not as effective as targeted intelligence. And we always have this presumption that mass surveillance will be beneficial, but it's not, because it's ultimately public money. Number one, we should consider. And secondly, the alternatives may be much more human rights preserving and at the same time effective. So let's contrast, for instance, CCTV cameras versus street lights and more
Right.
police. Think about it. Which is a better alternative? Which would you rather have? Better street lighting all over a city which a high incidence of crime like Delhi, or CCTVs
Right.
everywhere? And imagine those CCTV feeds are then given to RWAs and market associations. Now break it down further. Who do you think are elected and will have access to those feeds in the RWAs and the local market associations? And then think, what's the justification of the CCTVs itself? Women's safety. But who's watching
Mhm.
the feed? And imagine that as
Right.
young people who will possibly want to rent out premises, who will want to have their friends over for a Sunday lunch,
Right.
and you're already dealing with the landlord. But what if you play music a little loudly? What if your neighbors don't like you? So one needs to look at it very, very objectively. Mass surveillance by itself, to us and by any objective standards, do not satisfy these thresholds. Limited surveillance does. And limited surveillance, how can it be done? Surveillance essentially is an activity in which a person does not know that they are being watched. That's what distinguishes it from the principal framework of data protection, in which a person knows and then gives consent. Okay. So in surveillance, when you have targeted surveillance, it needs to be under certain safeguards. Firstly, there needs to be oversight, which needs to be played by Parliament. Parliament needs to know every now and then who is being surveilled, at least in terms of aggregate figures, so financial allocations can be made, because that's a democratic promise, right? Accountability. We are eventually in a country in which we are voting certain people, rather than certain people who are not voted get to watch over us all the time and have no accountability. Secondly, it needs to go prior to a judge who may be in the high court and examines the reasons why each individual who is being asked to be surveilled is being surveilled. And this also then provides an opportunity for a degree of probable evidence and some thresholds and some process being there, and due deference being there for a state security agencies. Okay, this can be done very well, and we have fleshed out an entire model actually, which is part of the what we call is the Indian Privacy Code, which is on saveourprivacy.in. So we explain why mass surveillance is bad. It does not satisfy objective standards of utility, going beyond our principal objections, which are premised in human rights, because we think it's just bad. Okay. And this all flows from not only our local understandings, but global understandings, which are there, and international frameworks. And secondly, we pose that individualized surveillance, which is there, needs to be as per a defined process with prior judicial scrutiny and parliamentary oversight. This model bill has also been introduced as a private members bill in two different versions. First by Dr. Shashi Tharoor and second by Dr. Ravi Kumar. Dr. Shashi Tharoor from the Indian National Congress and Dr. Ravi Kumar from the DMK. So I would invite people who are much more legally inclined to look at this process and then to also share feedback with us.
Right. I think I've read Dr. Tharoor's version of it. So Dr. Tharoor's bill, I've had a quick reading to that, but I'll surely be checking out the bill submitted by Dr. Ravi Verma as well. And
Ravi
yes,
Kumar.
Ravi Kumar. I'm so sorry. Yes. But thank you so much, Apar. This has been an incredible interview. I learned so much. I'm sure the people who will be watching the interview are going to learn a lot more about the digital space, its freedom, and the work and the contribution that the IFF has done over the couple of years towards it, and the work that we'll be doing in future as well. I'm so very grateful for you agreeing to be a part of this interview, and thank you so very much.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Kunal, and your entire team. I wish you the very best. We need more young organizations all across India, which advance towards social welfare. We need greater empathy, and I'm really glad you reached out to us. Please do let us know how we can also support you. If anybody who's watching this interview has any thoughts or comments, we're always open to feedback. In fact, all of our staff is on a very public forum. It is at forum.internetfreedom.in, and I'll request you to put in a message there. You can see our financial transparency, all of our work. You can question us, you can criticize us, and it's a place for sustained conversations. Our entire staff is there. They like getting this feedback. You can also tell us, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? We are always very democratic, even in our own ways of functioning, and looking towards improving it further, especially with the partnership of more young people. Thank you so much, Kunal. It's been an absolute pleasure.